Hello, everyone, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Better the Pond Pondcast, the Flying V edition, where we talk to incredible people who are creating impact and ripples on the pond. My name is Warren Berry, and I'm your host and the founder of Instinctive Solutions, where we believe that everyone is an odd duck, but that's what makes them awesome. Today, my guest is Steve Sims. Steve's father's words, "No one ever drowned by falling in the water. They did by staying there." There are a few people that you come across in your life that leave an impact. Steve Sims is one of those people. His books, Bluefishing and Go for Stupid, have not only impacted my life, but have of many other people around me. And I'm sure so many more that aren't. Steve is an odd duck that grew up in England and decided that being a bricklayer was not his calling. The curious and disruptive Steve Sims has learned that the greatest things that ruffled his feathers the most was the greatest fuel for moving forward. Steve gets to better the pond by motivating and inspiring people to do something stupid. Cheers, Steve. Well, today I tell you on the Better the Pond podcast, we have got an absolute treat. We have a speaker, podcaster, author of two amazing books, which we will get to. We have an aficionado of old fashions, and of course, the real life Wizard of Oz, Steve Sims. Welcome to the world's only Better the Pond Pondcast. It is absolutely fantastic to have you today.
It's an honor to be here, and I'm celebrating my first ever podcast, so it's a double whammy for me.
Fantastic. So, Steve, before we dive into the questions, can you tell my listeners just a little bit about, what do you do? What's your business about?
Whoa.
And it's a big question, but we'll try to keep it short. But
Right.
just an overall view of what does Steve Sims do?
Well, let's start with what I did. For 25 years, I was the most connected person in the planet that no one had ever heard of. I looked after billionaires to give them amazing experiences. Some of those things were driving a Formula One car, hanging out with Sir Elton John, playing drums with Guns N' Roses, singing on stage with Journey, going down to see the Titanic, going up to the International Space Station. And probably one of my famous stories is when a client wanted a really cool dining experience in Florence. So I shut down the Accademia Museum that houses Michelangelo's David. And at 9 o'clock at night, when they had the entire museum to themselves, I set up a table of 6 at the feet of David. And then halfway through that pasta, I brought in Andrea Bocelli to come in to serenade them during their dinner. That was the thing. That's what Forbes called me the real life Wizard of Oz for. Then I ridiculously released a book called Bluefishing, The Art of Making Things Happen, which was, thank you very much, which I really thought would be hated, vilified. No one would ever touch it because it was so simple that I thought everyone's going to look at it and go, well, that was a waste of money because I'm already doing it. Until I realized some of the smartest people in the planet were not. And we love to throw money at a problem rather than actually do something about it. So I started teaching, training, coaching, speaking all over the planet. And then, as you know, very recently released my second book of incredibly stupid ideas that you've just decided to avoid in order to impact your life.
And I will say, Steve, before we got on this, in saying that, those two books, I will say, Bluefishing and Go for Stupid, have impacted my life. And that was the number one reason I wanted you on here on the podcast, so you can go and we can spread that message further, because it was incredibly impactful.
Good. And that's the thing, the simplest things are, and that's why I don't understand why people avoid them. They go for a complicated, someone goes, hey, look, you can do this and it'll cost you 20 grand. More people will pay 20 grand than just doing the simple thing they need to do to create the maximum impact.
So on that note, Steve, I mean, we don't want to go sideways with this, but why do you think that is? Why do you think that, number one, we tend to overcomplicate things? And I agree that, in fact, you want to try to throw money at a problem rather than communication.
Well, you just answered it in that last word, communication. There's someone that we have a terrible relationship with, and it's us. How many times as entrepreneurs in our earlier years, or maybe some of the listeners out there, you sit there and you go, hey, I want to do this for a marketing campaign. I want to throw a party, or I want to do this offer. but no one will buy it. Oh, I could never do it. And we give ourselves a no before we've even tried, and that's the stupidity. Let other people tell you whether or not they like it. Just go for it, try it, and then get educated. So the first thing I think is that we actually talk ourselves out of doing the cool stuff. And then it's a case of, oh, but that's too simple. Oh, that's too easy. Everybody's doing it. Now, you read Bluefishing. Please tell me, honestly, online, on air, was anything in it complicated?
No, and that was the very most interesting thing about it. It was so simple.
Yeah, but it got me to hang out with Elon Musk and Elton John and the Pope. So if a bricklayer from London can be doing this simple stuff, I believe everyone else is already out of excuses. But we do have to get in line with having a conversation with ourselves, with that little devil on our shoulder, with our self-doubt, and get them all lined up to actually be part of the army in order for you to get what you need.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? It was funny. I just had a conversation. There's a good friend of mine, Gary Maxwell, who's an author as well, and we were just having this conversation about 2 weeks ago. And I was saying about, some of the things that I've done in the past, and it's under the same guise of this is, no, I can't do that. No, I don't think that's going to be possible. No, why? Yeah, there's no way I'm going to get it. And then when I actually decided to do it, I realized how simple it was and how impactful it was. And to the point going, why am I getting in my own way?
Do you know, we got to stop there. That's it. You hit it so well there, pal. You inserted the word why. Now, there's a lot of people that go, oh, I want to be wealthy, but I can't. I want to do that marketing thing, but I can't. I want to go after that client. Oh, yeah. If you just insert that why in there, why can't I go after that client? Why shouldn't I try that marketing campaign? Why is that lifestyle not for me? If you insert that why, it changes the way you not only think, but react. A good friend of mine that's gone, but will never be forgotten, Dr. Sean Stevenson. He always said that anything that ever happened to him, he always asked himself, was this done to me or was it done for me? Mm-hmm. And a classic example was COVID. How many people, and I'll put my hand up and say me, and I will preset by saying, hey, I'm sorry if you lost any members. I'm sorry if you went through any pain. I'm sorry if you were in any hurt during COVID. But for me, I got to spend 2.5 years with my family. Now, I know as a father and a husband, I love my family, but I wasn't aware of how much I liked them. And so for those 2.5 years, I was rejoicing. I was focusing on my business. Is my business where I wanted it to be 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years? And I was able to make those tweaks. I was able to look at COVID as a gift of extra hours. But how many idiots sat there going on Facebook going, well, I finished The Sopranos. What else can I binge watch and waste my life with? We just wanted to kind of get through it. And here's the dumb thing. Me and you, we can guarantee, and everybody else listening, we can also guarantee the same for them. We're going to die one of these days because that's just what happens. But what's not going to happen is when you're on your deathbed and it's your last few seconds, you're not going to get someone come down and go, whoa, time out. Do you remember those 2.5 years you lost back in 2020? Well, let's start the clock again because you get those back because that was a timeout. They're gone. You've lost those. I pray most people actually used them to their advantage, or if not, learn the lesson that you just screwed up 2.5 years of your life. Don't let another moment go by.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely concur in that, Steve. And this Pondcast is actually an example of that was out of COVID. It was I looked at COVID as an opportunity. It was the gift of time. Yep. It was an opportunity to grow. And yes, I agree with you that I'm sorry if anybody had, hardships and whatnot through it. But I think from an entrepreneurial mindset, it was an opportunity to grow, to expand, to learn, because you were actually given the gift of time, because you couldn't go out and do all the other things that you normally would have done.
You've heard of the BBC, haven't you? The British Broadcasting Company, the news station over in the UK. They actually came out with a study that during the 2-year period of COVID, over 5 million new first-time millionaires were registered. There has never been a time in our life, not just ours, but in history, there's so many millionaires have actually been first-time millionaires in a 2-year period. And everyone was saying it was the worst time of our life. For over 5 million people, I don't think so.
Absolutely. It's such an interesting piece. It's so interesting with mindset. Of how do you view it? What lens do you look through? So, Steve, let's jump into this because I really want to know your backstory. So here's the question. So what got you from being a gosling, and I am talking from the very earliest beginnings, Mr. Steve Sims, where were you hatched, to leaving the nest, to where you are today? Steve Sims, what is your backstory? And I'm going to preempt this with, I know you talk about being a bricklayer. I want to talk about being a bricklayer, because I think the fact is that and I look at your mindset, I look what you've done, I look at what you've accomplished. I think it goes back to the very beginning of your story because of the impact that you're having today. So I want to put that lineage together.
I, from birth, was a curious, aggravated kid. And so growing up in just outside of London, in the period of your post-war, your parents were the children of those parents that went through war. So you had this kind of mindset of kind of like, get a job, work your way through, get a pension, and then when you're 60, you should be okay. And I remember it was a time in our world where, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, if you were an entrepreneur, it meant that you couldn't really get a proper job and you were probably selling car stereos out the back of your car. Do you remember the times when being an entrepreneur was a dirty word,
Yes.
Yeah, snake oil salesman. Now we revere them like rock stars that they are. But I grew up without Instagram being able to show me how inadequate my life was. So I had no guide. I had no mentorship. I had no idea. We had a library, but I never really went in it. And of course, without guidance, what are you going in there for? I'm sure there was a J. Abraham or Tony Robbins book in there somewhere in the library. But of course, without a guidance, what do you know you're looking for? So as I grew up, I was this combination of aggravated, why do I feel this way? Why is it not working for me? Why am I getting up so early in the morning? And because I would literally get up in the morning, work on my dad's building site for a bit, and then go to school. And then, of course, when I finished school at the age of 15, I got kicked out of school, and my dad was like, right, building site. And I'm like, is this it? Now,
I got to stop you there, Steve. I'm sorry. I have to stop you there. I got kicked out of school. There is a story. So what, there's this aggravated young man who's very curious. And so I have a sneaking suspicion that you were the child. You were a bit of a shit disturber growing up and creating all sorts of trouble because you were bored. But what got you kicked out of school?
I wasn't. So actually, funny enough, I was always a big lad, but I was never a troublemaker. So there was never any kind of, violence or shenanigans going on. I would literally just sit there in a non-communicative state and just go, what the hell are we doing this for? And in school, I could be a distraction because I would ask the teacher, I don't know the answer to that. And you can back me up here. If you're in the classroom and the teacher goes, does everyone get it? And you put your hand up, well, you can ask but if you put your hand up twice, what do the rest of the kids do? They laugh at you, don't they?
Mm-hmm.
So it's this kind of like, well, I'm not going to put my hand up because I'm only going to get jeered at. And then you end up being dumb. Right. And so it was this constant cycle. And I'm like, I just wasted that class. Why was I in that class if I'm not learning? So when it came to my exams, and in England, bearing in mind, you have a different schooling system. We leave school at like 16, 17, and then we go to college and you have high school. But I was very, very young in my year, and they didn't even want me to go in for the exams because they just said it's a waste of time. You've hit 15. That's that. You can go now. And I remember going to my career advisor, actually my college advisor, and I sat down and they opened up your document and they went, your dad's a bricklayer, isn't he? And I went, yeah. And they went, here you go and get a job with him. And that was it. That was my college advisor. And that was like I hadn't warmed up the chair with my ass and I was out. And so that was it. But I just had that aggravation, and you answered it. You know, we were talking earlier about how this became, you wanted to be the solution to a problem. Entrepreneurs, we start with aggravation. And a friend of mine says it's aggravated oysters that make pearls. We start off aggravated about something. Elon Musk couldn't understand why it took 5 days to transfer money in a US bank to another US bank when really it was just an email of numbers. It wasn't someone picking up a bag at 5 o'clock and driving across town. It was just an email. So why 5 days? Well, we know the answer, because banks get to play with your money for 4 days. So he got so aggravated. What did he do? He invented PayPal, you know? So entrepreneurs, we're aggravated about something, and then we become the solution. And then we find out, okay, do you have the problem? Now you can buy the solution. So as I was growing up, I just couldn't understand. I couldn't accept. I couldn't tolerate what other people were accepting. And you've got to realize that 80 or 90% of the planet works for those 10% disruptors. So you are the minority. Entrepreneurs, we are the minority, but we're also the ones that steer the ship. And so for me, I had to find a way of doing it. And it came down to the point in the end that everyone on my building site wanted to go to the pub on a Friday and then just get into a pub fight. I didn't want to do that. So I needed to speak to people that were affluent, were rich, were powerful. And I wanted to have that conversation. I've often said in the 90s, if there'd have been podcasts, I'd have probably just started a podcast. But I ended up going to restaurants, bars, car dealership, anywhere that there was someone with money that I could just go, oh, I like your car. You know, why did you get your car? What do you do for a living? I learned the ability to communicate with affluent people by communicating badly with them. Now, you can see me. You've seen me around online and stuff like that. I'm a big bald-headed biker. So when you've got, you know, 240 pound of ugly coming at you in a car dealership car park, you probably think I'm trying to mug you, but I just want to be able to converse with you. So I learned how to communicate with these people by, in the early stages, communicating badly with them.
That is so interesting. Steve, I need to ask you the question, when you were growing up, whether, you know, you're a young lad or you're going into your teenage years, did you always feel misunderstood?
Yeah. The dots didn't line up for me. And that's like all entrepreneurs. We all go, oh, we had ADHD. Oh, you know, I couldn't, I'm dyslexic. I realized very early on that we spend a tremendous amount of our life trying to fit in until one day we realized that we were never designed to.
Right.
And that's the big thing there. When you realize you're not actually designed to fit in and play in that sandpit, you're actually was put on this earth to build your own sandpit and then sell it to other people. Then you go, oh, it's literally like taking the blue pill or the red pill in the Matrix. I can't remember what pill it is, but you just suddenly see clearer and it relieves you because you realize I'm not supposed to do that.
Yeah, I think, you know, where I was going with that, Steve, is that, you know, the power of being misunderstood, right, was actually the fuel to make you impossible to misunderstand.
100% accurate.
Yeah, that is just absolutely so crystal clear. Getting to understand you, that was your actual fuel to be impossible to misunderstand, and your ability to communicate so well. That is so
and that's the thing, you know, people are fighting to communication. We've already made one statement that we've got to communicate better with ourselves. COVID has actually done a massive dent in our ability to communicate, and so social networks. You know, all of these things. They moan about AI being so good, and that in 5 years' time it's going to be able to communicate like a human. The trouble is, in 5 years' time, I don't think a human's going to be able to communicate like a human because we are getting so shit at it. I can sit here now and I can say Trump, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Asian hate, politics. I can say those words, just those words, and it will trigger people. And I can also say those words and people will run for the hills. You see, we know we need to have conversations about those things in order to get them right. But we're also terrified about having those conversations in case someone grabs it out of context and makes a boomerang on TikTok and cancels our life. Because, hey, we love to cancel culture here. We love to screw people's relationships. And so we're terrified to do it. Now, me, I'll be inappropriate all day long, but I'm going to have a conversation, good or bad, because I'm yearning. I'm a 5-year-old. I've never stopped being a 5-year-old. I'm that 5-year-old that wants to know, why does that bother you? What's going wrong? I don't fully understand that. How can that help? I actually confronted someone a little while ago. Maybe confronting is the wrong word, but I think it came out that way. And I was in Austin and he was having a conversation with someone. And I said to him, I went, well, why is that a problem? And he just looked at me and there was this moment of kind of like confrontation. And I said to him, I said, you know, this temperature now between us, it doesn't need to be there. You were talking about something. I have openly, as a grown-ass man, asked you why there was a problem so you can help me understand. And as soon as I reframed it, but I had to go that extra step, he was like, well, I actually was thinking about this. I never thought about that. And another thing that I do, which it helps me, you may have seen it. I go to prison probably 3 times a year.
Right. I was going to bring that up just recently.
Yeah, we went recently. We're going again in March. And as I say, 3 times a year I go in, and I go into a level 4. Now, level 4, you're not in there because you've got a parking ticket. You know, that's organized crime level. And we train entrepreneurs in training, inmates that have decided, okay, I've had enough of this crap. Now I'm going to take my hustle into legal, productive ways. And we converse with them. And when would you ever be in an environment where you're conversing with gang leaders and things like this and people like this? And all of a sudden you're going, well, hang on a minute. I can understand how those series of things happened from the world you were in that got you to where you are. And unless you can actually speak to someone and relate, you don't have to agree, but unless you can see and relate and understand and consume, then you can't communicate. And if you can do that with people from such extremes, then it increases your ability to be able to communicate with more people. And I'm telling you today, there's not a damn thing that you can't download an app for, but you still can't download an app to be able to do the communication for you. And when you can, that's the worst thing ever in the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, Steve, I'm really intrigued of going to prison. And, you know, you're seeing, I mean, a lot of these guys they have their hustle, and a lot of them are entrepreneurs. They're just selling a different product. It's the same thing.
Yes.
Right. And what do you think would be the greatest thing that you've learned from someone from that side of the street, shall we say?
Choices. We have so many choices. There's all those people out there, and we'll just take it down to a grassroots level. There's all these people out there moaning about the media. Well, most of us have got 10 digits. Any one of those can push the off button. Okay. So you don't have to be a tool to someone else's media. Just turn it off. And I noticed a lot of people, it was all based on choices. And a lot of people that are incarcerated today didn't see those choices. I had a conversation with a guy once, won't mention his name. And I had seen him probably about 2 or 3 times. He was inside for, I think, like 30 years. Something was happening and there was a chance of his parole in like the next few years. Now, we get upset if we don't get a return on our Facebook ads in a week. This guy's excited that in the next 3 years, he could potentially be up for parole. And I was chatting with him one day and he said about, you know, he's got his parole coming up. And then I went back another time and he was really, really excited. And I said to him, you know what, you're excited? Is it about that parole that we spoke about last year? And he's like, no, my best buddy died. And I'm like, hang on a minute. You're really happy because your best pal died. this is what's going on here. And he turned around and he said, that was the last link to that life. He said, most people come out, they can't get a job because they're now a felon. So what do? They end up going back to the streets that got them there in the first place, and you start again, and it's a constant cycle. You can't break that cycle because people like to tarnish you with, you're a felon, you're a criminal, you did this, you're bad at it. And they love to tarnish and pinpoint people and title them. But all of a sudden, he knew that when he left there, he had no ties to his old hood. He could literally walk back in there and they wouldn't know who he was. He would be in danger if he went there. So he was now free to go forward with new choices. And so it's really down to that choice. Some people, they didn't have a choice. You know, some people, you know, I spoke to people in there where from a young age, on their way to school, they were being asked to just drop off that package to Uncle Jimmy. And of course, it's not Uncle Jimmy, and the package is a key of heroin. So, you know, they're doing it as kids. They don't know. And then all of a sudden they get stopped and they're like, well, mum and dad, and, you know, oh, you don't talk to the police. And, and it's a constant cycle that you can't break unless you take the choice up here in your head that, okay, I'm the one that's making the choice. And I have never seen so much positivity than I have inside by people that have just suddenly woke up one day in their 4x6 cell and gone, this doesn't have to be my life. You know, my body's caged in here, but my mind doesn't have to be. Right. To be able to adapt to that mindset, I have never had an entrepreneur, and I take about 40 entrepreneurs each visit inside. If you want to come with me, reach out to me. Look me up anywhere at Steve D. Sims on any of my socials. Reach out to me. I'll let you know what's going on. We don't make any money from it, but we do ask for a $500 donation to the cause. And we've never had an entrepreneur that literally has not had their life changed when they've walked out of those gates.
Wow. That I could go. Man, I could talk to you all day about this. That is absolutely impactful, Steve. That's incredible. I'm going to get back on track because you're talking about choice, and I'm going to get back to the question. Say, you talk about when you left the nest. Making a choice. So when you were going to be you were on the path of being a bricklayer, you were a bricklayer, and then you made a choice to not. Get me up to speed from that point on to where you ended up in Hong Kong, and of course going back into the whole bluefishing piece.
I don't think I had a choice. It was this aggravation that, you know, what's going on. And I remember one day being on the building site, and my dad said to me he needed me to kind of bring some bricks up the ladder onto the scaffolding. So I took him up onto the scaffolding. I've got a big pile of bricks on my shoulder for the bricklayers. And I get up to the top of the scaffolding, and there's my dad, my uncle, my two cousins, and my granddad, all stood in a line working on the scaffolding. And my granddad was nearly 80, and there's me like 16, 17 years old now. And I thought to myself, there's my family lineup, and there's my future. You know, my cousins were, I think my eldest cousin was like 19. The other one was 25. You know, they're always picking on me because I was obviously a young kid. And then my uncle, and then my dad, and my grand. And I remember at tea break time, running down to my granddad, running up to him in the hut and going, hey, granddad, did you ever think you'll be doing this at this age? Now, I need to let you know this. My granddad was massive. He was like Hagrid. And I just remember him being nearly 7 foot tall. Now, I'm 6 foot tall, so I'm no shorty. My dad's 5'5". So he kind of lost out on the height gene pool. But so I went down to my granddad and I said to him this, and I expected really to get a smack in the nose with a statement like that. But instead of being upset, he just, you know, breathed into his tea to cool it down a bit and just said to me, with never looking at me, and I'll never forget this, didn't even look at me. And he said, son, if you don't quit today, you'll be me tomorrow. I was like, shit, I've got to get out of here. I've got to break the cycle. So I left the little huts, the little tea hut on the building site, ran up to my dad, and I'm like, Dad, I've got to quit. And my dad's looking at me, he's like, what are you going to quit? And he's looking like slightly up at me. And then, of course, my granddad walks behind me. And whenever my granddad walked behind you, you knew it. It was like a bloody great building. My dad looks at me, looks up at him, looks back at me, and he went, all right, you quit Friday. And that was it. My granddad died shortly after then. So I never, ever got to tell him about that pivotal moment. But I left because, hey, we all react with fear. But most people actually react with fear by avoiding it and going, oh, I don't want to try that. It could all go wrong, you know? For me, fear is actually standing still. Fear for me is not taking that opportunity, not trying. And I live up here in Los Angeles at the moment. I'm very happy. I get to fly around the planet. I'm happy with myself. I'm happy with my friends. I'm happy with my relationships. But I wouldn't be happy if I was in the same place today that I am in 6 months' time without trying new experiences, new life. I need to try things. You know, over the weekend, I tried ripping apart one of my motorcycles and I've scuffed myself up and I'm full of cuts and bruises. I didn't fix it, but I got to see what the inside of an engine looked like. And now I've got to spend next weekend trying to fix the damn thing. But that's the point. You've got to grow. For me, fear, and I think, again, coining a friend of mine, he said the definition of hell is to meet the man or woman you could have been if you had tried.
Right.
Now, for me, fear causes you to try. I'm scared of things and it makes me go. So that's my fuel. That's what got me trying different things. And it's what got me accepting a job from London to Hong Kong for a trainee stockbroker. And they were recruiting a whole bunch of people over there. And they flew me over from London. And I lasted, and I'm not even joking here, 1 day. And then the following day, they asked to see some credentials. Of course, I didn't have them. They fired me. I lasted 1 day in Hong Kong as a trainee stockbroker, and then I was fired, and I ended up working on the door of a nightclub.
A whole day. Bad man.
A whole day. I landed on the Saturday. I got to see Hong Kong a bit on the Sunday. I went to orientation on the Monday, and on the Tuesday morning, they fired me.
So there you are, by yourself in Hong Kong, no job.
Yep.
Now you got to figure it out.
But isn't that a lovely place? Sometimes those crutches, sometimes those friends, those circles, those attachments can actually be detrimental. You see, for me, and again, it's all this mindset thing. You are in control of you. I'm in Hong Kong. Now, I wasn't happy. I had no job. I had to figure it out. But I also never had any anchors. You know, I couldn't go back to my dad and get on the building site. I couldn't go back to my mates and work in his garage. I couldn't maybe get into some other dubious businesses with some of my other biker buddies. I'm now in Hong Kong and I've got to figure it out. And the dumb thing is, I took the doorman job just to be able to get a little bit of cash. So I had some cash flow each week while I tried to find out the good stuff. Without realizing it, until I started after a few days, I had the best job in the planet. You see, I could now see how rich people interacted with rich people, how people that pretended they had money interacted with each other. The guys looking for trouble, the girls looking to start trouble. You know, I was getting a crash course MBA on body language and human psychology. And it was imperative. And I swear, through everything I've done in life, had I not been at that door and got a pedestal of human interaction, I would not have been able to go on the journey I did from then.
Well, you know, Steve, you know, thinking about, you know, reading Bluefishing, especially which again was so impactful, is that you took a job that was you know, you were a doorman in a club and you took it to a completely different level. And what you did was different from what I'm sure any other doorman would have ever have done. And when I look at it, and I look at it, it's the same pattern as you're doing now. Like it really hasn't changed. It's just a different capacity, but it's the same thing. And, you know, going back, and I know you're a disruptor, but what do you think was that driving force, Steve, that made you think differently as a young man, as a doorman in Hong Kong?
I think it's what my wife says is my superpower, ignorance. And there's the old saying, ignorance is bliss. Well, do you remember when they made, and I think it was the Empire State Building, they got the Indian tribe to actually do it because the Indian tribe realized they all knew through the culture how they were dying. And because none of them have ever worked on a skyscraper before, it wasn't from falling off a skyscraper. So in which case they were ignorant to the fact that they were in trouble. Okay. So it was done. For me, I was ignorant to the fact that this is how you do things. I didn't see that box. I didn't understand those rules. So I went along onto a playing field and I went, right, well, we're going to play a game, but I don't know the rules. So let's make them up. Okay. You know, and that's what I did. And I got to see it. And you're right. I'd get to the door and like the doorman would just kind of want to save as much blood off his shirt he could and then go home with one of the hot girls. That was his goal. Okay. My goal was to now use a trapped environment of people to be able to test bed my skills of communication, to be able to pluck out the affluent ones in this group. You know, it was like, you know, getting, you know, fishing in a bucket. And I now had that opportunity and I was able to go up to these very, very wealthy people going, hey, and you know, like if you're in a bar or if you're in a restaurant, you get the manager come up and they're like, hey, you having a good night tonight? You know, when you've seen that happen. Well, it wasn't happening in my bar, but it was happening with me. So I was walking up to people and the manager was like, what are you doing? And I was like, and he couldn't fire me because I was like, oh, just wanted to make sure everyone was happy. And then, you know, they needed more drinks. Then and he was like, you're not taking my job. And I'm like, I don't want your job. You know, I'm the doorman, you know, and he'd be like, oh, okay. And he still would never go and say hello to it. But I started doing it. And then I realized what I wanted to do. All I wanted to do was to have an hour's conversation with an affluent person and go, hey, why are you wealthy and I'm not? Why have you got loads of money and I haven't? Why have you got opportunities and I haven't? That's all I wanted to do. Now, I knew to be able to have that conversation, I had to do something for you. I was in a nightclub. I knew of other nightclubs. Hey, do you want to get, there's a new nightclub opening up down the road. Do you want me to see if I can get you in this Thursday? Yeah, that'd be great, Steve. Sure. You know, let me do that. I'll get you in. Then you'd phone them up and go, hey, did you have a good time? Hey, I'm in your area. Do you want to grab a coffee? And of course, because you had helped them with that, they were now okay to help you have a coffee with you because they thought you could help them with other things. My business grew. And because people knew me as a concierge to billionaires and very wealthy people, I've often told people I was not in the business I was in. I wanted to have a conversation with affluent people. Hey, if it meant I've got to get you walking down the red carpet with Elton John just to have an hour's conversation with you, fine, I'll do it. Yeah, I've got to get down and see the Titanic with James Cameron. Fine, as long as I get the conversation. I just wanted to have that conversation to understand how people's minds really worked. And if I've got to get you that, then it got bigger and bigger. It went from getting you into nightclubs to getting you into the unveiling of a new Mercedes to getting you into fashion weeks and local events. And in the end, I ended up working with, I will say, every single major event in the planet, from the Macau Yacht Festival to the Paris Fashion Week, Monaco Formula One with Ferrari to Sir Elton John's Oscar party. There's not been an affluent event in the planet that I've not had my fingers in.
And all to have a conversation.
And that was the only thing.
That's too simple, Steve. It's too simple.
I'm sorry. I'll complicate it on the next podcast.
That is fantastic. Yeah, well, it is so fascinating because it is simple, but yet the impact that it has, right? It just goes back to this whole theme. Steve, I have another question for you. And what is the most impactful thing that has happened to you in your life that's ruffled your feathers, and how did you respond to it?
There's ruffled my feathers.
That's ruffled your feathers.
Wow. Okay. There's many different ways I can take that. But again, it's Sean Stevenson. You know, there's that time in your earlier life where things don't go the way you planned them, which is a common theme for any entrepreneur. That you just go, oh shit, everything's going wrong, until you really kind of like sit back and go, hang on a minute, did it go wrong, or did it just go in a different direction? And what's that path like? And you really go back to that. Was this done to me, or was it done for me? And I noticed something after the pain. Now, every entrepreneur has been sued, ripped off, lied to, laughed at. We've all had this. And if we haven't, it's coming, because that's the life of an entrepreneur. Okay. And every single one of those horrible moments when your best friend steals your client bank, or when, your best assistant suddenly takes your book of business, or, someone steals your patents, or takes what you did and patent it so they now own it. All of these things happen, but they become education points. They become points where you go, okay, you screwed me over. If I had done this, you wouldn't have been able to do that. So now I'm educated. I'm not going to allow that to happen. The daft thing is, we can most of the time in our life look back to that dark moment, divorce, business, bankruptcy, any of those dark moments, and go, do you know, if that hadn't have happened, that wouldn't have happened. And if that didn't happen, I wouldn't be here. And so when you suddenly start realizing that, and you plan and plan and plan, and something goes wrong, you actually do sit back and catch your breath and go, okay, it didn't go the way I planned it. So where's it going? And is there some gold that I'm now going to find here? And it's that education. And I noticed one of the things about affluent people, and I noticed this when I was dealing with Elon Musk, anything that ever happened, he would physically lean into it. And he would lean into the problem. He would lean into the failure, because that's where the education is. No one becomes successful by being successful. They become successful by things going to shit, them learning from it, becoming educated, experienced, and that's the route that it takes. So when something goes wrong, harness it and go, okay, this wasn't a failure. This was an education. What did I get out of that? And that's one of the things I learned from me. So the ruffling of feathers, I'll give you a prime example. I did a contract with a company. Sadly, even today, 15 years later, I can't mention this company's name because I'll get sued. Okay. Yeah, they have that in contract. I can't even verbally mention their name, and I don't want to. But I got involved with this company, and they had celebrity endorsements and all these kind of things. And I thought, this is fantastic. And I made a bucket load of money off it. And then 1 year and 1 day later, I got a cease and desist and a legal lawsuit for about $250,000. And I went, why? And they went, you were only part of this deal for 1 year. After that year, if you mention our name, we automatically get to sue you for $250,000. And they won, because I'd not paid attention to the contract. Okay. I'd not paid attention to the small print. They made 3 times money that I made, but they were so tied up and so anal that anyone that made anything, they just wanted to crush them. And they were horrible with it. Now, that was a really, really bad experience. But then I went and worked for Sir Elton John, which was one of the greatest events out there. And they had a contract. And in this contract, there was kind of a similar clause. But because of the other experience, I was able to see it, recognize it, and go, whoa, I don't like that in there. And they went, fine, we'll take it out. And they took it out. And I ended up being with that group for 8 years. So my education from the first one benefited me with working with the greatest event and charity, Sir Elton John's AIDS Foundation and the Oscar parties, for 8 years.
So isn't that interesting? That dark moment of being sued, it's all collapsing, right? You took it, leveraged it, learned from it, catapulted it, and it threw you into your future.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. I will say that I had a similar experience of partnering with someone in one of my businesses, and it was after we reopened, rebranded, renamed, totally renovated the building. 4 days later, he says to me, I can't do this. Just quit on the spot. And like that, everything changed. But with that, though, right, got me out of the building into a new facility, changed my mind, and actually threw me into a much greater direction than ever would have happened before. So what was interesting was somebody I was really pissed off at, I've actually come to thank him.
It's weird. Those moments. I've had people that, had I had a bat near me, maybe I would have struck them with it. That now you look back and you go, if you hadn't have done that, I wouldn't have done that, and I wouldn't be sitting here.
Right.
And the greatest vengeance, the greatest get back is to be sitting in your lovely home overlooking the ocean, thinking that they're still in their 1-bedroom apartment with their mum.
Right. Absolutely. I never really thought of it that way. So Steve, moving on. So, you heard my metaphor earlier. We talk about ducks and geese, but the
Yep.
geese fly 71% more efficiently when flying in the V formation than when flying alone.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think, my question is, what do you think the secret is to getting a team flying in a V formation? But I kind of wanted to shift it a little bit for you, because I think, from what I see on the outside is you have such a solid tribe. So what do you think the secret is for an entrepreneur or a business owner to create a tribe? How do you get people flying in the V formation versus a team?
So there's two answers to that. And the first one is you don't. Every entrepreneur thinks they can handle it themselves until they don't. And it's that moment that the entrepreneur goes, hang on a minute, I'm pretty good on my own, but I'm exceptional as a team. And it was that moment of clarity for me, that I suddenly realized, hang on a minute, I'm good at what I do. I'm okay at doing the other stuff, and I'm really crap at that stuff. I've got to get people that are exceptional at every other one of those. I've got to become an army. I've got to be a V formation. And so you go from that realization, and again, this will happen to entrepreneurs. You'll get that realization, and then it's the desire and the necessity of understanding that you realize in order for you to be the best, you got to have the best surrounding you, and then go and find the best. And here's something I learned from a lot of people. And there's a gentleman out there called Cameron Harold who does a absolutely great conversation on this. He talks about employing on culture.
Mhm.
Don't employ on whether or not they're good on Excel spreadsheet. Don't employ if they're any good on PowerPoint. You can go and do a 2-hour course on PowerPoint. But if you don't have people in your sandpit that share the same belief, motivation, vision, and culture, you can never teach that. So for me, I want to know what's important for you. What do you want to be part of? What do you want to see happen? If in 5 years' time you're here with me and we're doing this, is that where you want to be? And if you get the yeses, hey, fill up the resume with training stuff. But you've got to look at people's cultural bias, understanding, and vision to know that if you're actually singing the same tune. Because if you're not, that's gonna conflict, and it's gonna rub each other up badly. So I look for culture in the people that I take on board. And when you get them, here's the other thing, it magnetizes other people. You
Mhm.
suddenly, people going, look at that band of culture. I want to be part of that. And you get people coming over going, hey, I do this and I really want to be part of it. And you go, well, okay, we got a spot for you. So you've got to understand that you need a tribe, one. Then you've got to have a desire for the best tribe. Don't settle. If it means you haven't got that position filled for 2 years, don't fill it. And if you do fill it and it's the wrong fill, fire them and go again. But it does take some time. But my God, when you get that V formation, seamless.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one line that I do love, Steve, is you can hire their heads, you can train their hands, but until you have their hearts, you will never have the whole person.
Beautifully said.
Yeah. And I was just talking to, I actually had a mutual, I guess we'll call a mutual friend, Joey Coleman, on the
Yes.
Pondcast. It has not been released yet, but we had a wonderful conversation about this as well. And we were talking about culture and fit and how
Yeah.
to bring those people in. So to create that V formation.
Yeah, Joe's a sharp guy on that, so that'll be a good good podcast for people to listen to.
Yeah, absolutely. So now, what are you doing right now, Steve, to better the pond? What ripples are you creating out there in the world?
I was stunned with bluefishing. Absolutely sideswiped. I could not believe how many people were avoiding impact and looking for answers in the wrong place. So I was asked to, can you coach me? Can you train me? Can you have a community? So what I'm trying to do now is to be the impact for other people to action. So I have a Sims distillery, which is my community. I speak literally all over the planet. I coach, I train, and I have my private events called speakeasies because I want to actually be, as we spoke about right at the beginning of the show, I want to be the solution to a problem I see that is growing and is cancerous. And if I can get people to go, well, hang on a minute, why do I have to do that? Why can't I do that? And if a bricklayer from London can be doing that, then so can I. So I want to be generating more impact for people.
There's one thing that I find interesting, and that the speakeasies, which I have not personally attended, but I have heard from other people who have, that they're absolutely phenomenal. And just going back to this, Steve, what do you think that your edge is? What do you think that your secret sauce, that your magic is, that you can create that much impact and that much ripple for people, whether that be through your book or through a speakeasy, even going to prison? I'm just trying to get this wrapped up into what is that certain thing that Steve Sims does that no one else does?
That's a really good question. And I think I've changed my answer maybe 10 times while you were actually answering it. And I think probably for simplicity and clarity of answer would be that I don't do anything that wouldn't excite me. And then I look for other people that want to be excited in a similar way. You see, too many people today try to appeal to everyone. I want to appeal to me. If going to prison excites me, I wonder if it'll excite anyone else. If running an event called a speakeasy will appeal to me, I wonder if it'll appeal to anyone else. So I just look to attract like-minded people like me into a room. And then when you do that, and you don't try to just arrange like a fishing net of all different kinds of people, if you get people to share the same mentality, again, it's down to that culture. When they get into this room, they get to easily communicate with everyone. And one of the biggest compliments I've ever got from my speakeasies, and you can find out about it at simspeakeasy.com, but for the biggest compliment I've always got is that the people in the room are superior to the people on the stage. Now, I've had Jim Quick, Jay Abraham, Joe Polish, how many? God, I've lost track. I've had Jeffrey Madoff. I've had so many famous people, Ken Cragen, on this stage.
Mm-hmm.
And still the audience is the real desires, the real group. And that's the other thing. You get to talk to people that share the same problems, aspirations, cultures, fears. So your group, your family expands in that group. So I think what I did was I did an event. I put together an event that I would want to attend, and then just ask myself, is there anyone else out there that shares that kind of thought process? And 4.5 years later, I'm glad to say, yes.
So are you trying to tell me, Steve, there's more people like you out there?
Scary. But yeah, I'm not lying when I tell you that when the book came out and I started doing speaking gigs and coaching, and I'm not for everyone, and that's good. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, and even my wife said, she went, enjoy it because we don't know how long this will last. And, we've got another best-selling book out, and there's no slow up of coaching, training, and doing the media and all the other stuff that we do. So I think there's a lot of disgruntled, aggravated weirdos out there that obviously are ready to make some change.
Yeah, there is. And I think that it's so great that you're absolutely giving an avenue to do that. And something just came through my head when you were talking, Steve, which it was so simple again, but so impactful. And this happened to me recently. is that I was in Calgary, Alberta, traveling, and I went and I actually had, because I too like a good old fashioned, and I had this old fashioned, and I got it, and it was this old fashioned with a piece of orange and some iced croutons, is what I call them. And I looked at this thing, and honestly, the first thing that came to my mind was Steve Sims, and I went, "This is unacceptable," right? And and what was funny is I ended up having a conversation with the waitress and the bartender, but then actually the CEO, and which actually turned around and said, "Well, we've got it wrong. We're going to make it better." And again, it was something so small and so easy, but you really got me thinking, because I am a weirdo as well, and realizing that I am not going to settle for this when I can have this.
Yeah, standards are a slippery slope, and standards don't have to be, well, I'm not going to drive my Ford. I'm going to wait for a Rolls Royce. Standards don't actually cost a lot. It can be asking for a new bag of fries if the fries are cold. It can be asking for a drink to be done differently. It can be asking for someone to put the heating up. Whatever it is, if you suddenly start demanding more of your standards, the funny thing that happens is that those people around you start demanding more of themselves. And it starts this accumulation, starts a snowball rolling up to higher standards. And that's a really beautiful thing to see.
Yeah, and I was just good. The reason I'm bringing that up is that you obviously have figured this out and set the standard, then attracted those other people in to have the same. So that, again, going back to the ripples that you're creating.
No, thank you.
So what do you think, Steve, is my last question for you. What do you think is, the biggest lesson that you've learned along your journey of, solid 29 years, clearly, that you would share with an entrepreneur today?
Wow. There's so many, but I think one of them actually came from the weirdest source in the planet, which was my dad. Now, my dad was not entrepreneurial, or maybe he wasn't, didn't realize it, but he was not the sharpest tool in the shed by far. But I remember one day he's walking down the street, and I was only about 16 years old, and we're walking towards a new building site that he was working on, and he's smoking away like crazy, no conversation, and he suddenly puts his hand on my shoulder while we're still walking, and he says, "Son, remember this. No one ever drowned by falling in the water. They drowned by staying there." And he takes his hand off my shoulder and carries on walking. I stopped, and I'm like, what the hell did that come from? He's been consumed by a fortune cookie. And I could not make sense as to why he said that to me, where he had read this, why he did it. And I was just like, and then I had to run and chase up with him and get on the building. So we never, ever spoke about that again. But then as things go wrong in our life, and we've already had that conversation, I suddenly realized, look, I could lay here and drown, or I could stand up. So I would probably get every entrepreneur to memorize that, but no one ever drowned by falling in the water. They drowned by staying there.
Wise words. I love it. That is swallowed by a fortune cookie. That's a great line. Okay, one last question for you, Steve, is if you were standing on a mountain and the whole world is intently listening to you, what would you say?
Wow. On the understanding that they would actually do what I say, which is the harder thing, I would say, do something stupid. I would want people to do it. And I am going to qualify that and say, why stupid? If I tell you to go and take your trip, if I say, hey, this podcast, let's make it impossible. Let's break through the impossible. Let's make it the greatest, best podcast out there. And we're going to break that ceiling. All of those things. And even your face now, if you look at your face now, you're gritting. When you go for the impossible, you're kind of, okay, let's attack. But if I say to you, hey, let's take your podcast, let's get a stupid goal. Let's go for something ridiculous. All of a sudden, you start smiling, and the 5-year-old neurons start clicking into your brain cells, and you start gamifying and imagining and creative. When we go for stupid goals, we do it with a smile. When we go for an impossible goal, we go with a grimace. So you want to be smiling when you go for ridiculous things. So I would get people to go for stupid goals and then achieve them.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way that you phrase that, Steve. So, Steve, I do want to thank you for your time today. I do want to thank you for sharing your stories. It's fantastic. And I will say, because, when I was looking to get Steve Sims on my podcast, I was going for stupid. So, if people want to find you, Steve, where do they find you?
Well, the book is at goforstupid.com, or it's simply on Amazon under Go for Stupid. But Steve D. Sims, D for dashing, and only one M in Sims. Steve D. Sims everywhere. SteveDSims.com, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Steve D. Sims, absolutely everywhere.
Absolutely. So, and I just want to put a plug in there because we talked about Bluefishing. I think was an absolutely impactful book, which actually changed my thinking incredibly. It really shifted my thinking. Go for Stupid, I think, was absolutely fantastic. It's an easy read. It's simple, but it's powerful. And I would highly recommend people go and actually read these books, because they will change how you think. And then of course Sims Distillery, which I'm also a member of. I love your information that's in there for anybody who wants to go and just learn more. Really, I think it's really that impactful. And of course your speakeasies, and then if you want to go to prison through the front door, not the side
get
door,
to come out in the same day. That's the perk. Many people can get into prison. It's very easy to get into prison. It's not so easy to get out in the same day.
Absolutely. So reach out to steveDsims.com. Is that correct? They can go find
That's the best for everything.
Yeah. And then they can filter out from there and find everything that you do.
Perfect. Thank you.
So there you have it, folks. We had an absolutely amazing and fantastic and a stupid time with Steve D. Sims. And this is Warren Barry, and I'm flocking off to take you beyond the pond to better the pond, because we're better together. Thank you, Steve.